welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are some cards that I have recently been taking out of my commander decks. So this video is going to cover a couple of different topics. I'm doing it in this specific way because I recently ordered a ton of cards. You know, it just hasn't worked out for me because there was sort of a mix-up. I sort of got all of my March in the Machine, Aftermath, and Lord of the Rings cards all sort of at the same time. And, you know, as I talked about, I think in my Commander Masters review, the way I do it is a new set comes out, I look at the cards I want for my decks that I have, and you know, maybe a couple others that I might consider. I just order those singles, and then they show up, and I put them on my decks. So I ended up getting a whole bunch all at once, and I made a whole bunch of changes to all my decks. And I ended up taking out a lot of cards that have been in those decks for a long, long time for various reasons. And I decided, you know what, why don't I make a video about it to discuss why I took those cards out. And it will cover a few topics. And of course, one of the reasons I imagine why a lot of people will take out cards in their decks is because, of course, you just get better versions, right? We just have so much stuff that we can put in those decks that it's starting to be tough to find room. So those old staples that you used to play all the time, you take out. And I obviously have a lot of, you know, commander staples that we have had for a long time on this list. And I think I'm probably going to make another list soon of commander staples that we don't see anymore because, man, this format changes fast. But there's some specific reasons why I took out these individual cards that I will be talking about, and I want to discuss the reason why. So I'm going to start out with Dawn of Hope. And this is one that I had in my Patron of the Kitsune deck that I recently took out. And I don't even think I need to mention the reason why. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. Okay, well, the Gaffer, which is essentially what replaced this, I don't have to pay the 2, right? And this, when I first saw it, I can't remember if I had already made my Patron of the Kitsune deck or I just made it. When I saw this, in fact, this might be the card that made me want to make that deck because I was like, okay, you know, back then, White did have a little bit of trouble drawing cards. And I thought, wow, whenever you gain life, and of course, Patron of the Kitsune, as I say all the time, is the best commander for getting those life gain triggers, right? If you just want lots of little individual triggers, right? I attack with 7 creatures, I get 7 instances of my commander's ability, and then my opponents attack with 7 creatures, I get 7 more. Tons and tons of life gain triggers. The guy's great for that. Here, though, I gotta pay 2 every single time. It's not a great card draw option, and of course, in fact, Well of Lost Dreams, like I say all the time, I would argue it's the best card draw option in the entire format of Commander if you're in a life gain theme, because again, every single time any creature attacks, as long as my commander's on the table and my Well of Lost Dreams, it's just pay 1 mana, draw a card, which is incredible, right? It doesn't get much better than that. I mean, maybe Necropotence is better, I guess, but still pretty phenomenal. And like I say all the time, even in a mono white life gain deck, it is becoming really difficult for me to find room. I just got a couple of other great includes for that deck, and it's so easy with Archivist of Ogma and all these other options in mono white now. If you're in just a mono white deck that's not doing life gain at all, you have a ton of options for drawing cards now, really great ones. And if you're in a life gain deck, you have even more options. So now it's like Dawn of Hope, which is one of the reasons I put the deck together in the first place, because I thought it was a great card draw option for that deck. Took it out because I don't need it anymore. Let's talk about Hedron Archive, and of course, been a Commander staple since forever, and I recently made my Mana Rocks video a while back. I'm trying to think if I talked about this. Was this in my, it must have been, right? This would have been in my 4 Mana Rocks. You know, I did top 10 for the 2, 3, and 4 Mana Rocks slots. And this was in there. I'm not sure where it was. It is certainly one that I used to play a ton. And again, I'm trying to find room for these new cards. So what am I going to take out? I guess I'm going to take out Hedron Archive, right? So this is a card that I used to put in not all my monocolor decks, but certainly a lot. Again, it adds 2 colorless. So I don't really want to put in a 2 or 3 color deck. I used to play it in my monocolor decks a lot, and it was a decent card draw option. Later in the game, I sacrifice it, draw 2 cards after I don't really need the mana anymore. That's what I like about it. Again, in that video, I talked about Mind Stone, or I guess in the video before that, I talked about Mind Stone and how I don't really play that anymore. Actually do still have that in one deck. Funny enough, I said I didn't play it anymore at all. I do have it in one deck still, so I am still playing it. Hedron Archive is one, again, that, you know, it's not like I don't play these cards at all anymore. I'll just say some of them I do play in very specific situations. My Gerard Sacrifice artifact deck, which is now my Lulu Sacrifice artifact deck, that is the one place where I am still playing this card because it works with the sacrifice artifact theme. But every other deck, right? Again, I used to put this in my mono white decks, even in my mono blue decks, because it was a decent mana rock and then also could draw me cards. And I just find that pretty much every color is not really having a lot of issue with drawing cards anymore. So I'm looking for a spot in my deck. There's way better mana rock options. Again, I'm playing Liquid Metal Torque and Ornithopter Paradise and all those better mana rock options, or I'm playing Patriarch Seal if I want to untap my commander, or I'm playing Canter of Endless Water if I want no maximum hand size. So this guy's coming out to make space for those either cheaper mana rocks or better mana rocks or better card draw options. So I don't really use it that much anymore. Next up, this one was a really surprising one that I finally pulled the trigger and started taking this out of my decks. Return to Dust, 2 white, instant, of course, exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast this spell during your main phase, you may exile another artifact or enchantment. Of course, this was never originally meant for the commander format, but of course it fit so well because you could cast it at instant speed if your opponent just had a Blightsteel Colossus or Omniscience come down, so in a pinch you could do that, but you could also cast it on your main phase and for 4 mana hit 2 things, so it was great value. The option for instant is good. I think in the 500 times that I've cast this spell in a commander game, maybe once have I cast it at instant speed. That has almost never happened. You want to hit 2 things. 4 mana, exile 1 thing's not, that's not very good. Obviously, the exile is also good. It is still a great card in the commander format. 2 decks. Again, my Patron of the Kitsune deck was one. My Shanna deck was the other one because I'm like, okay, in that deck, I have a small creature recursion theme. So Return to Dust doesn't really fit. It's a good removal spell, right? Again, there's so much synergy with all these new cards that we're getting that, okay, well, I want to play Cathar Commando instead because Cathar Commando is hitting artifacts and enchantments. It's not exiling. It only hits 1 thing, but it fits the theme of what I'm doing. Haywire Might is another one. Came out recently that it's fitting the theme of what I'm doing. So how much artifact and enchantment removal do I have? I'm looking at my deck and I'm like, okay, well, I got all these little creatures, a lot, right? If I'm making a white-green deck and I'm hitting artifacts and enchantments, man, how many options do it cost a Caterpillar, right? The fit the theme of what I'm doing is super easy that I just don't have room for Return to Dust. Do I even have this in any deck still? I don't think I do. Again, in my Boros deck, I don't need this anymore. Rip Apart is, for me, a better version in a Boros deck. Again, it doesn't hit 2 things. It doesn't exile, but I got other modes. So am I going to put Return to Dust in there or am I going to put Rip Apart in my Boros deck? For me, I'm going to go with Rip Apart because it's cheaper and it's also, it can get a creature or a planeswalker or something off the table as well. So for me, I'm thinking there's a lot more versatile removal. Excise the Imperfect. That was the trump card. That was the, okay, sorry, Return to Dust. You're gone. Almost every deck I play, I'm likely going to want Excise the Imperfect in there over Return to Dust because it's also instant speed and it's going to hit any permanent. Again, it doesn't hit 2 things, but it's going to hit any permanent, which can be really, really important. I really like the versatile removal, and Return to Dust just isn't versatile enough for me anymore. I'm pretty sure I don't have this in any decks. Sad to see you go, buddy. You did a lot of work for me. Similarly, Sylvan Reclamation. And again, another commander staple since forever. Just got reprinted in the Dominaria United Commander last year. This one's a little different because it does have the basic land cycling, which is why this always was a great card. 5 mana to exile 2 artifacts and or enchantments, so you can hit either. And again, this is not like Return to Dust, where it has to be during your main phase. You can do this whenever. Of course, the basic land cycling, you can do whenever. That's nice. It is really versatile. You can do the land cycling early, although in a green-white deck, that's, you don't really need to do that because, of course, you can ramp with green. White is also great. It's the second best color at getting lands into play. I would say usually when I had this in my hand, I found I didn't need to use the basic land cycling. I'll just save it for later in the game when I, have an opponent with a Smothering Tithe and I got another opponent with a Chroma's Memorial or something. I'm going to use an example that's not Blightsteel Colossus for once. Why would I waste it on the basic land cycling when later in the game it could be really, really important for me? So I actually found I wasn't using that. Although, again, just like with the Return to Dust, having the option, even though I never do it, having the option is good. Here, even though I don't usually basic land cycle this, having the option is good. I still do have this in my Dragon Lord Dramoka deck. Again, that deck is very old, at least 5-6 years old. Very early on in my commander career, I made it. And this was a commander staple. And so I put it in there because it was just an auto include. If you made a white-green deck back then, Sylvan Reclamation was an auto include. Again, there's so many phenomenal options in green and white for that this has sort of gone to the wayside a little bit, and I don't really use the basic land cycling. It is still a really good card. Again, I still have it in one deck. Definitely am not using it as much as I used to. If I make a new deck in white and green, for my channel or anything else for one of my patrons, I don't even think of it anymore. Definitely a card that I think has gone to the wayside for me is Temple of the False God. Again, everyone's very familiar with it and just did get reprinted in March of the Machine Commander, right? Does it still get used? I don't know. This is a tough one. I've heard a lot of, even back in the day when this was a way more popular card, there was some conflicting, some people loved it. A lot of people hated it because, of course, there is a possibility it taps for nothing. I have run into that situation before where, I'm in my Abishon deck and I only have 4 lands in play, and one of the Temple of the False God does nothing, so I only have 3 lands. Well, that sucks, right? It sucks having a land that doesn't tap for mana. And, when you get to the 5 lands, okay, now all of a sudden you get this huge boost, but you're sort of stuck in that bind for a little while. It can be tough. A lot of people hate this land. A lot of people really love it. For me, I'm sort of in the middle. And again, this is another card. Again, just like with the Hedron Archive, it's tapping for 2 colorless. So I put it in my monocolor decks because I don't care about the color so much in my monocolor decks. And again, not in the green decks. Why would you ever play this in a mono green deck? I don't know. It certainly is not needed. I have had people say it's better in the mono green decks because you can get to 5 lands faster. Okay, sure. I guess you can make that argument, but I don't think it's needed. So why would I risk it? Why would I risk this on turn 1 or 2 or 3 when I don't need to do that? I'm not that desperate for the 2 colorless mana in a mono green deck. That's my thinking. Whereas in a mono blue deck or a mono red deck, which is where I typically would play these, that is, not so much the case. So I would be more help for me. Yes, it would be more risk, but more upside as well in those decks where I need it. And again, even in the lands, I think Rivendell is the card I just put in my Abishon deck where I'm like, okay, I want to put more lands in here that are doing, I want utility lands. I really love utility lands, especially in my monocolor decks, again, where it's a lot easier to find room for them. A land that just taps for mana, I would much rather have a utility land like a Blast Zone or a Scavenger Grounds. Like those lands are so impactful, especially later in the game where it can really be a game changer. A Ghost Quarter, stuff like that is super, super impactful. And for me, I now have in all my monocolor decks at least 2 lands. So not just Ghost Quarter, I also got a Wasteland, or I got a Strip Mine, or I have a Tectonic Edge, right? I have at least 2 of those because I got to get at least 1. Guaranteed every game I play, there's going to be at least 1 land in play that I want to get off the table. I have a patron that is a really big fan of Maze of Ith that I always have to get that off the table every single game. So I always want at least 2 of those. So I got to make room. I can only have so many colorless lands in my deck. Temple of the False God is a card. Again, I believe I have it in 0 decks now. I used to play it a lot, but I've got to make room. I got to make room for all those other more useful utility lands. And again, even the MDFCs, right? I could take out my Temple of the False God, and I don't know if I would do this, but you could take out your Temple of the False God and put in one of those MDFCs that could be really, really helpful later in the game as well, right? So I got to make room. Even with my lands, I got to make room. And I'm going to end off with Panoramaica, or a couple of cards that I'm going to talk about where now I'm going in a little bit of a different direction where got to make room for Panoramaica. And what are you talking about? That card's busted, right? And I had to talk about this one because this is a card I recently took out of my Tishana deck, okay? And it is a card that, like a lot of people who love the ETB strategy, I fell in love with when it first came out. I was like, oh, it came out in Kaladesh, right? And there was a couple of cards, Panoramaica, Paradox Engine, which thankfully is banned, and Aetherflux Reservoir. Those 3 cards all came out at the same time, and they are all colorless. And for anyone who was playing the Commander format at the time remembers, they all became Commander stables immediately. Exploded. You saw them all over the place. Every single game I played, I would see one of those cards or all of those cards. You would see them all the time. And I hated Paradox Engine, and I was so glad when it was banned. And I hated Aetherflux Reservoir, and I still don't love it, but I don't think it should be banned. Panharmonicon is one that I loved. And I loved it because, of course, I was being selfish and I was being completely subjective because I liked it for my decks. I loved the ETB strategy. And at the time, I had just made my Tishana deck, which is an ETB strategy. Obviously, even if you just have a commander that has that ETB, you get the double trigger. And of course, Tishana has a great ETB, any commander that does. But if you're doing the ETB strategy at all, well, it's just an auto include, right? And at the time, I think I had 3, possibly even 4 decks because I love that strategy so much. I had a bunch of ETB decks, right? My Rona deck was another one where I'm just like, okay, well, that's going in there. Auto include, right? And that's why I don't really love it. Funny enough, none of those other decks do I have anymore. Only my Tishana deck was the last deck that had this in there. Again, I got a bunch of new cards, and I'm looking at my deck and I'm going through, well, what am I going to take out? There's some really neat stuff here, stuff that works really good with my commander. What am I going to take out? And I'm just looking at that Panoramaica and I'm like, this card's kind of boring. I mean, it's good. Certainly it is good. It is what, a lot of people will call a win more card. And I like that term a lot. It does that. I mean, this was the OG of that. And we've seen it a ton lately. And I'm getting a little tired of it. I got to be honest. We even see it on commanders now. Do this thing another time. Right? Again, a win more card is that term I kind of like, where I'm already doing something good. I'm just going to do it some more. All right. I'm going to deal double damage, or I'm going to deal triple damage, or I'm going to add double the mana. Of course, we see this with the tokens all the time. And how long before we have the triple token creator or the triple harmonicon, right? I'm sure it's coming down the pipe at some point. That's part of the reason I took it out, where I'm just like, kind of getting tired of all that. Like I'm already doing something really, really good. So I'm just going to do it some more. I'm kind of getting a little bored with that. Right. And so that's part of the reason why I took it out. And I'm also just like, okay, well, I want to make room for other cards. Rather than just a win more universally good card that can work in any deck, I would rather have a card that more synergizes with my commander. And I know people will say, okay, well, you're just making your deck worse. Sure, but I make my deck worse by taking out the Soul Ring, which I have already done that a long, long time ago. It's not just about making my deck the best I possibly could for me. That's just not the way it works when I make commander decks. I want things that are going to be, yes, synergized, which of course Panoramaica does, but I also want stuff that's going to be fun and interesting. Panoramaica's not that fun and interesting, to be quite honest. And I'll throw in another example of a card, and I just thought of this one, to Fairies Ageless Insight, when I was talking about this, because I actually had this in my Reign Academy Chancellor deck, and I recently took it out. Not because of this big, I got a bunch of new cards scenario, so that's why I originally had it included on my list, but I thought, oh, here, there's a card that fits in the same category of the Panharmonicon thing, where I'm just doing this thing. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw 2 instead. So again, it's just the win more, or I'm just doing more of the good stuff that I'm already doing. Drawing a card's already good, so why don't I just draw a whole bunch more, right? And I had this in my Reign deck because, of course, Reign has that trigger. And I'm like, again, I'm trying to make room, and I'm just like, do I really need this? I'm already drawing 2 cards off of my commander's ability. Do I really need to draw that? I need to draw 4 instead? I don't. Right? It's overkill, really, what it is. I don't need to do that. Drawing 2 cards is already good. I don't need to draw a whole bunch more. It's not necessary. I mean, yes, it is better. Drawing 4 cards is better than 2, but I don't need it. It's not needed. So I'm not going to put it in. And it really is, again, Panharmonicon is one of those cards that if your commander has an ETB, you can put it in there and get the double ETB. If you're certainly in an ETB strategy, why not put it in there? Teferi's Ageless Insight, I mean, again, any commander, and I don't know I'll put it on the screen, how many commanders there are in blue that have a draw the card trigger. Again, I just did my Minion Carl deck, right? Borborygmos and Fibblethip, which has the card draw, which I didn't even think of it. Again, these cards I don't even think of anymore. Panharmonicon, funny enough, also could have gone in that deck because your commander has a great ETB. I could have put both of those cards in that deck, right? Every time my commander ETBs or attacks, I get to draw extra cards with my Teferi's Ageless Insight. But you know what? I'm gonna put some more interesting, I put a lot of really interesting, unique cards that synergize nicely with my commander. I'd rather put those in. And I know people will think, well, maybe that's not the greatest strategy. Maybe these cards are better. I don't care. I'm gonna play the cards that I think are fun and interesting. Again, the Minion Carl deck is the perfect example here, because now once I get up in colors, it gets worse. Now I'm in 3 colors. My commander is also dealing damage. So someone's like, oh, well, why not put those damage doublers in there? Right? Okay, so now I got to shoehorn all those in. I was looking at my Browlin deck. Now I'm starting to take those out. That is one thing I thought when I put that deck together is, oh, well, I'm just going to put all those effects that make red source deal more damage, because of course that works great with my commander. There's so much of those effects now. I took one out. I took out my Ember Hellion, because I'm like, okay, I have so many. It's getting silly now because I have so many of those. Whenever a red source you control deals damage, you deal more damage, right? Again, it's just those win more effects that now it's almost like my whole deck is taking up that space, right? And if I build that Minion Carl deck, okay, well, I can put Panoramaica in there, and I can put Teferi's Ageless Insight, and I can put those damage doublers, and I can, right now I can just, then it just takes up the whole deck. So I'd rather just not do none of that. I know, because there's a lot of really interesting synergies that I could put in the deck that, fun, interesting cards. Guild Feud is a fun, interesting card that I talked about in my 10 cards videos a long, long time ago. And I finally found a perfect fit, and it's in that deck. Yes, I could put Teferi's Ageless Insight and just draw a bunch more cards, or I could put Guild Feud in there and tuck my commander third from the top, and then when I look at the top 3 cards, of course, I'm going to find my commander, put it back into play, fight one of my opponent's creatures, kill their creature, I get the card. That's just a more fun, interesting way to use that ability. I don't know. That's my thinking on it. There's just so much, right? Again, when I first saw Panoramaica, I was like, okay, that's an auto include in all my ETB decks. I think I bought 4 copies immediately to put on all my ETB decks. I'm using 0 of them now, right? Teferi's Ageless Insight, same thing. It's just like, okay, well, any commander that's drawing cards or any strategy that's just drawing cards, except the one you draw on your draw step, is going to want that. So how many decks is that? That is hundreds of thousands of decks that you could put Teferi's Ageless Insight, right? Again, any token doubler, any damage doubler, those cards just fit in so many decks. It's like, okay, well, now I just don't feel like playing them at all. And if you're doing more of those strategies, if I'm doing several of those strategies, now I have to shoehorn all those in. No, I'm good. I'm shying away from these cards, and I'm not doing it to be like some sort of niche. Hey, look at me. I'm like a commander hipster where I don't play these cards. No, I just tired of the win more cards where I'm just going to do more of the same thing. I'm already doing that. Right? I'm already drawing cards. I'm already dealing damage. Yes, it might be efficient to do that, but I'm going to do something that's a little more fun and interesting, because that's why I play this format, is to do fun and interesting things. That's my take on it. So again, I'm talking about the cards that I have been taking out of my decks recently, but again, I'm getting into a larger topic here, talking about deck building and also talking about the commander format overall. So I don't know, take what you want from that. You guys let me know in the comments below if there are any commander staples that you've been taken out of your decks for various reasons. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.